Our guest today is Mr. Brad Boyson. He is the Executive Director at SHRM, Middle East and Africa. He has held many senior HR roles in global organizations. He is a published author, a frequent note speaker, and he teaches SHRM certification preparation.
Today, Mr. Brad will talk about SHRM Forum in Jordan and many HR issues. How are you, Mr. Brad?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, welcome, Mr. Please tell us about SHRM, its vision and mission.
Sure. Well, I often start by saying SHRM is the world's largest HR association. We have almost 300,000 members globally. And sometimes we say SHRM or we say SHRM. It's the same organization.
Yes.
Our head office is based just outside of Washington, D.C. in the United States. And we have regional offices in 3 countries. We're based in the UAE for the Middle East, North Africa. We're in China, and we're in India. Our mission is to advocate on behalf of the HR profession and as well to be an advocate for HR professionals globally.
Great. Okay, Mr. Brad, tell us about the SHRM Forum in Jordan. How did you create it, and what is the purpose of such forums?
Yeah, Forum is a wonderful opportunity for SHRM members to create a broader community within the HR profession. So this structure of a forum is kind of an extension of what we have in the United States called chapters. And we have over 500 chapters in the United States. So taking that model, we've expanded it internationally. And it's an opportunity for people who are SHRM members or perhaps interested in becoming a SHRM member to connect with other like-minded professionals. And I use that word professionals because we really want to advocate the professional practices of human resources. I often sort of joke in a slight way that there's a lot of people who have jobs in HR, but that doesn't mean they're HR professionals.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, true.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay, Brad. We know that SHRM is providing a big support to its members all over the world. We need to know about the kind of support you are providing to your members all over the world, especially the support that you will provide to Jordanian HR people, especially after creating the SHRM Forum here in Amman.
Thank you, Adi, for the question. I think one of the best places to start is the realization that we are a not-for-profit. We are a non-government organization, which means that we are owned by our members. And that's really important to emphasize because in the context of forums and other activities that we do, that means our members are our shareholders. So when we talk about what SHRM can do for the members, it's really also telling the members how we can collaborate as a profession. So unlike the mandate perhaps of or a mission of a for-profit, whereby it's, what have you done for me lately, what can you do for me, we often turn it back to the members and say, part of what we do is create a common global brand that advocates for the best practices in human resources. Do you want to be aligned with that? Do you want to join that community and bring people under that brand? And we actually like to present ourselves as a sort of a nation-neutral association because we are advocating for best practices in HR, not just sort of one country's exported practices of human resources. Indeed, our head office is in the United States. And I think when you look at the history of the HR profession, a lot of the best practices come from the United States. But if we're going to be professionals in human resources, we have to say what are practices of, the standards and practices of HR are universal. Think of medicine, think of law. There are principles that are universal. And yes, individual practices, whether it's in Jordan, whether it's in the Middle East, whether it's in the GCC, India, China, United States, wherever, may have some individual nuances. But what we try to do with the forums is bring together the professionals and say, how are we going to be more professional? How are we going to add more value to our organizations? And a lot of that is about the regional professionals coming together and saying, how do we raise the standards in our own region? So it's not really about how can a US-based brand that is a member association come into different markets in the world and sort of impose certain things. It's about what do you need from us that we can help you as a local community collaborate and raise the standards of HR in your city, in your country, in your region.
Yeah. Another question, Brad, please.
Sure.
Our forum members are always asking about best practices. Let's say that some members are working on the recruitment cycle and how to develop it, how to advance it. Do you imagine that SHRM can provide best practices from their own experience and to provide it to our members, our forum members here in Jordan, to help them really accelerate the achievement?
Well, Adi, the way that we do it is through our professional qualifications. We have things like our certifications, the SHRM CP, the SHRM SCP. These are professional certifications, accreditations. But it's not like we as SHRM, as an association, have people in a room who develop these exams and develop the study material and develop the best practices. We go into the communities around the world and say, tell us what are those best practices. You yourself have participated in this process.
Yes.
And that's how we work best as an association. Is it's not about us as we're not a group of professors in a university who do research and then sort of tell the world, here's the way you should do HR. We focus on the practitioners. We go out globally. We bring them together, and so it's in essence it's really not a SHRM way of doing HR. It's about HR professionals, and we are the facilitator of disseminating that information. So. We're very proud of our new certifications, which are entering their third year, and we believe the body of competency and knowledge that is the source code of all of our learning interventions going forward is by definition best practices and principle based.
Yeah, thank you, Brad.
Thanks, Ed.
Great. Mr. Brad, we need to know and clarify the importance of having empowered HR professionals within the organizations.
It's a very, as they would say, a chicken and egg type of question, right? A lot of people who work in HR say, I should be respected because I'm HR and I represent the culture of the organization and the workforce of the organization. And in fact, it doesn't really work that way. Each and every HR professional has to earn the respect of their organization, and every organization has its own culture. So what we don't want to get into as professionals in HR is this sort of idea that, I have a professional certification or I have a license, respect me. We want people who are business partners, who understand their organization that they work for, the mission and vision of their unique organization, and come into that organization and say, how can we add value on the people operations side? So as I say, it's a bit of a chicken and egg, but different people are going to be better at that than others. You may be a great HR professional in one industry and one organization, but you go into a different industry and a different organization and you may not be as effective. So it really starts with the person understanding the role of HR in their organization and being able to say, I need to understand this organization, I need to earn the respect of the culture and the people in the organization. If I can do that, I will be respected and be able to represent the best practices of HR better in our organization.
Interesting. Mr. Brand, how to enhance the role of being strategic partner and advocate for employees?
In many ways, this is an age-old question in HR. If you go back in the history of our profession, at one time we were called personnel. Right? Personnel everywhere, and in some parts of the world that still exists. You'll meet people that their job title is personnel or the department is personnel, sometimes in government, right? And by definition, what personnel meant was an administrative function. And so what the research shows is what organizations, and it doesn't matter if you're government, private sector, not-for-profit, is that organizations most value HR when it's strategic. And the strategic part is the value add. The strategic part is the forward look and the future, the alignment with the organization's mission and vision. What that takes is a person who is able to come into the organization, or maybe they already exist in the organization, and look at specifically sort of what is that long-term vision, where's the organization at now, and how to connect that from the people operations side. And that's not administration, that's not personnel. And sometimes people who are very good at the administrative side of HR are not necessarily good at the strategic side of HR. And that's why a lot of organizations will actually look to operational people and move them into a human resource role or strategic role, because they understand the organization better than that person who has maybe a degree in HR, maybe even a certification in HR, but they don't understand the nuances of the organization, both in terms of a tactical and strategic level. We would say as SHRM is let's not compromise. The best practices, the best organizations in the world are that because of their people operations, and they don't compromise on HR. They expect their HR leader to be an operational expert and an HR expert. And you put the two together, you need both of those to be strategic, because it's kind of like walking on one leg. You need both legs. And unfortunately, we have a history of HR where people are usually stronger in one or the other. Going forward, what we would say as SHRM is organizations have to have higher expectations from their HR. They need to communicate to their HR function and HR leaders that they need to be business partners, that they need to be organizational experts. But the last important piece of that is that it's that advocation for the individual employee. HR sits between management and ownership and the collective of the employee in the workforce. And some people are very good at bridging that contradiction, right? Are you management? Are you for the employee? You're neither. You are a function that's designed to optimize the relationship between those two often conflicting entities. And for some people, like myself, I love that role. It's an immense challenge. But for other people, they often default to be seen as acting too much on behalf of management or too much on behalf of the individual employee, and they fail. You have to be able to bridge that. You have to be able to seem to be acting in the best interest of the organization, which by default is the collective of all of the employees. If you lean one way or too much the other, often one side or the other won't respect you. They won't go to you for advocacy or guidance or strategic leadership. And it's a challenging role. And I think the nice thing is that we're really understanding what are the elements of that role, what are the competencies required to do that, to be strategic going forward. We're becoming more evidence-based and a bit more of a scientific profession rather than sort of a gut or instinctive profession, which is important at one level, but in order to leverage what we can do as HR, we have to be more evidence-based and we have to be more scientific.
Okay, how HR can convince the senior management to invest in their human capital?
Wow. Isn't that an ongoing question? You know, and we, to be fair, on our website, SHRM.org, we actually have an FAQ that sort of answers that, you know, in different levels. It will say, you know, it has a whole list of why should you invest in, say, perhaps SHRM certification, why should you attend a SHRM conference. But from my own personal point of view, it comes back to what we discussed earlier, it's about earning that credibility. You know, the individual that holds the leadership role in HR, regardless of their academic qualifications, regardless of the organizations that worked for, you know, and let's be honest, in the Middle East with certain culture aspects like wasta and your family, right? You know, all of these are cultural nuances that we need to understand, but the individual has to earn that respect. And so I don't want to ever get to a point where we say HR needs to be respected because it's HR, or HR, the person needs to be respected because they have a certification or some other qualification. It's like politicians, you know, we have politicians who come from legacy families, you know, whether it's in democratic or non-democratic environments, but at the end of the day, the community respects the person who is sincere and they're, you know, for lack of a better word, benevolently trying to make the community better. I think HR works the same way, and it's earned. It's earned through the individual's credibility, which is at the pillars, a base of competencies in human resources.
Yeah. Brad, we know that one of the major roles for HR is to preserve a high level of well-being for our employees.
Yeah.
How we can do that?
Well, this comes back, to me, the question comes back to sort of the science of HR, and that's one of the really exciting parts and times we're in right now. Whether you're looking at the technical side in terms of big data, or, you know, the medical sciences and the wellnesses in terms of well-being and the, you know, the overlap of technology and medicine and mindfulness, and all of these factors are really coming together right now. And so I think it starts with sort of role modeling the behavior. One size does not fit all. You know, there was a time when we had the discussion maybe 10 years ago where we talked about work-life balance. That discussion was a bit ill-founded in the sense that is there some ideal? Work-life balance for you, Adi, might be different than Sally or myself. So to be good at this sort of wellness balance, we have to understand the science of wellness and well-being. We have to understand how it adds value to the organization. We have to be sort of more flexible in our approach to HR, you know, and especially now that you're looking at people living older. We have a fairly young demographic in the Middle East, but in other parts of the world, you can have 4 or 5 generations of people working in the same organization. And what's wellness to one isn't necessarily wellness to the other. So the science of understanding mindfulness and well-being are at the foundation, but also the flexibility to adjust to your unique workforce, the demographic profile of your workforce, and the goals and the mission of the organization. It's juggling many more things than in the past where we talked about HR as a administrative, transactional, or even to a certain extent operational role.
So, Mr. Brad, some countries, they don't have ethical legislations, work ethics legislations. In light of absence of kind of legislations, how can HR professionals help to create ethical culture and, let's say, internal policies covers this ethics in organizations?
I think that's a difficult, and I'm not just saying that, that's a difficult question to answer. You know, you look at what's been happening in the United States recently with the harassment issues, high profile in the entertainment industry, and we often look at the U.S., especially with its mature legislation, laws, and very transparent sort of advocacy. And how can this happen in such a market like that? And then we look at other markets in the world, and we just, it's very concerning to emphasize the importance of your question. I think again it starts with the HR professional role modeling the behavior of whether that's obviously following laws. Laws are laws, and that's what makes them very simple. They're non-negotiable. But when you get into ethical behavior and cultural elements, it can be very challenging, to juggle these sort of softer issues. And some people are better at this than others. But to gain the respect of your organization, you have to role model the behavior. I've often seen HR professionals dramatically fail in their role because they preach one thing, and then within the context of their environment, they do another thing. They have a double standard. They say one thing and they do another, or they sort of talk out of both sides of their mouths. And what that translates to mean is people who are often very good at HR can be a very lonely role, like leadership itself. It's leadership. When you're in a position of power, some people are going to be very genuine to you, and other people are going to treat you a certain way because you're in a position of power. HR is very similar to that in its function in the organization. And so the person in a leadership role in HR has to be very aware of the information that's given to them. Always ask themselves, why am I being given this information? Sometimes people are trying to manipulate you. Sometimes people will come to you very quickly to try and gain your favor. Other people, they're more introverted and they are more hesitant to sort of see who the person you are. So the HR role, especially the leadership role, has to almost be a bit like a politician who goes out and builds the confidence for the function and themselves. And make no mistake, if they don't role model the high standard of ethical behaviors, of the laws, of the cultural norms, and the universal human rights standards, they're not going to be effective in that role.
Brad, you said a short while ago about your plans on a global side. You said that SHRM forums are a key way to advance HR outside the United States. What are your future plans? I'm talking about SHRM's future plans on a global side regarding the HR development.
Well, I'm a Canadian national, So I found SHRM when I was looking to go beyond just sort of the confines of my country, in terms of my profession. And one of the things I'm really proud about SHRM or SHRM is that we no longer identify ourselves as a U.S. HR association. Although often, people will say, here's Brad from the U.S. HR Association, right? And, I have to smile because we are advocates for the profession. And no other HR association in the world is positioned the way SHRM is to advocate for HR. Not American HR, but HR as a whole. Having offices outside of the United States, having almost 300,000 members, having a professional qualification that is based on international research. It's not an American product that's exported to the world.
Yes.
Every other association in the HR space takes a national sort of product or knowledge and exports it and says what works here will work somewhere else. We've flipped that around, and it's a learning curve. It wasn't always this way. 10 years ago, if you were sort of engaged in a SHRM professional qualification, it would be very biased to an American way of thinking. So, Adi, to your question, I think we are very much ahead of any other entity in a similar position in sort of advocating for the universal practices of HR. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to be aligned with that, and I think you are too.
Of course, yes. Thank you, Vlad.
SHRM sets you apart.
Yes.
SHRM sets you apart.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Brad. Thank you for your time and support for Amani Human Capital. Thank you, Mr. Adi.
Thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you for being here.
Your pleasure.
Amani Human Capital. Please subscribe our channels, our social media networks. Thank you so much.
Thank you.